My friend and colleague, Professor Peter Mayo, distinguished educators, colleagues, comrades all. Popular education as a distinct expression of education transformation rose to prominence in the mid-20th century, largely influenced by Paulo Freire of Brazil and Carlos Alberto Torres of Peru. It sought principally to reposition education as a means of personal and social transformation and put the learner at the center of that process. In many respects, it was a progressive response to the age-old question of what is the purpose of education. The key foundations of popular education reside in three interrelated domains, the three P's. Philosophy or purpose and methodology were inextricably related, and the three P's synthesize the essence of what distinguished popular education from traditional modes of education. The three P's, the philosophical. The purpose of education was posited as the liberation of the human mind and spirit. The learner was accordingly seen as an active agent of this process and not to be treated as the recipient of transmitted knowledge. A conception succinctly described as the lighting of a fire and not the filling of a pail. Second P, pedagogical. The philosophical orientation was concretely expressed in the pedagogy. If learners are to be active agents of their own learning, then the process and methods of teaching and learning had to be revisited, and the learner's own life experience and condition should logically be the subject of their own critical inquiry. The third P, political. Any process which seeks to make one's own reality the subject of critical inquiry inevitably becomes a political act, as the awakening of consciousness makes it impossible for persons to live comfortably with the status quo. This is something that was recognized in the Caribbean as far back as 1832 by the English scholar Henry Nelson Coleridge, when he warned, and I quote, that it would be impossible to march Negroes on the road to knowledge and compel them to stand at ease within the old entrenchments of ignorance. So popular education involved participatory approaches to learning, the contextualization of learning, dialogue and critical reflection, action and social change, and an emphasis on equity and social justice. Let us turn to popular education in the Grenada Revolution. Popular education in the experience of the Grenada Revolution was not a construct residing in the education sector. It was a methodology that connected the people to every aspect of transformation happening in the country. There were three main intellectual confluences in the Grenada experience. The first, the work and philosophy of Paulo Freire, with which I had been familiarized through the coordination of a prison literacy program in St. Lucia, organized by a Catholic Liberation Theology group, the Study and Action group in the early 1970s. Secondly, the Cuban literacy campaign, well known and respected in the Caribbean for its dramatic transformation of mass education. And thirdly, the New Jewel movement, the NJM, the Revolutionary Party's conception of participatory democracy, arising from its critique of the inherited British parliamentary system and its abuse by the dictator Eric Gairy. One of the contradictions of the Grenada Revolution was, on the one hand, the influence of the Tanzanian conception of ujamaa, which emphasized grassroots democracy, and on the other hand, the adoption of a classic Marxist vanguardist culture within the NJM. From each of these tendencies, there were specific learnings and adaptations, which we will specifically speak shortly. But collectively, these intellectual and tributaries converge into the dynamic that was popular education in the Grenada Revolution. In essence, the influence of Freire was most impactful from a pedagogical and methodological perspective. And the impact was experienced in the National Literacy Campaign and the subsequent establishment of centers for popular education countrywide, as well as in the conduct of community and zonal meetings. Ferry's dialogical approach, the critical and collective exploration of local realities, with the starting point being the focus on the lived experience of participants in these socio-educational encounters, were profoundly Ferryian. The major impact of the Cuban literacy campaign was its mobilization techniques and the organizational structures which infuse vibrancy and a deep sense of urgent patriotic mission and humanitarian obligation. The conversion of all schools, and in many cases community centers, into adult education centers by night, and the structures of management were very Cuban influence. Every center for popular education had a mobilization function and a pedagogical function. The mobilization function of the CPE was made a priority of the party so that all party members nationwide, as well as civic organizations, had a role to play in the mobilization effort. The rallying call for this effort was a slogan on billboards all over the country: if you know, teach; if you don't, learn. And every worker a learner, every learner a worker. Mobilization of the CPE also extended beyond the narrow educational thrust to incorporate cultural revitalization, as CPE centers organize other thematics. So, for example, big drum cultural groups in Carriacou, literacy emulation ceremonies at which learners also perform the songs and the poems that they wrote and produced, women's groups in the CPE centers discussing issues related to women's health, but also incorporating all women in the geographic zone. The pedagogical function incorporated three principles of participation, experiential learning, and local action. The instructional material in the post-literacy phase established an interdisciplinarity of subjects. A set of 4 consolidated textbooks established that interdisciplinarity between English language, mathematics, geography, and general science. In the English section, for example, a reading passage on water would speak generally about the importance of water to life and challenge learners to think of essential uses of water in life. This is complemented in the mathematics section with a lesson that addresses water from a mathematical perspective, problem-solving cases with the result of a leaking community standpipe, for example, and the calculation of the wastage of water, or the estimation of the total utilization of water in their personal households on a daily basis. As a practicum related to the mathematics problem of water wastage was a challenge to the class to identify all water leaks in the community infrastructure, measure and assess the extent of wastage, and invite the Water Commission to fix those leaks with voluntary labor by the community. The NGM notion of assemblies of the people, in what was described earlier, one can see the role of popular education not simply as an educational construct, but also as a form of democratizing state responsibilities by encouraging community participation and the assumption of responsibility by citizens for improving their own condition. Undergirding these tendencies and supporting their cohesion were 3 principles: participation, experiential learning, and local action. Popular education was inextricably related to participation because its focus on local realities at the national, community, and domestic level as subjects of critical inquiry was essential to the development thrust of the revolution, to building the human capacity, to the changing of mindsets from dependency on state welfare to more self-reliant actions. The principle of experiential learning enabled the problematization of every aspect of Grenadian reality, whether domestic, community, or national, or in fact even international, the placement of the country internationally. The identification, critical exploration, and problem solving of issues affecting the Grenadian people started inflecting individual and collective consciousness. And local action began to build a culture of self-reliance and resilience. CPE and community groups engaging every weekend in some collective community improvement initiative, contributing labor with the government ministries providing technical guidance and materials. All of this began to infuse pride in community and confidence in the capacity to transform one's circumstance and community. Finally, with the elementary work done by the CPE in planting the institutional seeds of lifelong education as the foundation of individual advancement and national capacity, the revolution systematically created specialized educational institutions that move persons from basic knowledge to more professional competencies. Examples of this was the Mirabeau Farm School, designed to teach practical farming to produce a new generation of more tech-savvy farmers. A national fishing school, incubating a modern fishing industry, even succeeding in producing its own salted codfish substitute, and a hotel and hospitality institute. The process of developing the national budget was another process benefiting from popular education approaches, as it involved both geographic zone consultations and sectoral women, farmers, youth, elderly, business people, workers, consultations, sectoral consultations to brainstorm ideas on what should be the priorities for the coming fiscal period. Building the country's fiscal and development program for each year based on collective input, scrutiny, and prioritization. While all of this was done in the context of a revolution, there are many lessons to be learned from that experience that could be used in any context that is intent on taking a transformational track. The Grenada experience was an exceptional and rich manifestation of the power and the potential of popular education to serve as a trigger for igniting national consciousness and pride. Time does not permit in this presentation, but of equal importance would be a more in-depth exploration of the tensions and the ideological contradictions that resulted in the dynamic of the demise of the revolution. Notwithstanding the collapse of the revolution, these lessons of popular education stand as a testimony of the power of the construct, its convergence of the philosophical, the pedagogical, and the political, and how this combination can change national consciousness. And in these current difficult times, it serves to us as a reminder of the admonition of Raymond Williams of our duty as popular educators, and I quote, to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. Thank you.